The Greeting Agreement. Patron Stories, The Greeting Agreement, Part 1, by Morgan Olson. Chapter 1. The Girl Who Heard Too Much. When Mara was small, the grown-ups said she had good ears. They meant she listened when spoken to, that she didn't interrupt, that she soaked up lessons like a sponge so polite it never squeaked. They didn't know she was listening to something else entirely. In her house, words were only half the weather. Dinner might sound like calm plates clinking, her father telling stories about the office. But beneath the surface another current hummed, a faint chorus drifting through the room like steam off the soup. Sometimes the voices repeated what had just been said, softer and sadder. Sometimes they contradicted it. "I'm proud of you," her father would say. "I wanted more than this." The undertones sighed. Her mother's laugh rang like glass, and the whisper behind it murmured always, "Please see me." The family called these moods decisions. Dad had decided to be cheerful. Mom had decided to forgive. Mara had decided to behave. But Mara knew decisions didn't hum like that. Feelings did. When she asked about the extra voices, everyone got uncomfortable. Her mother said she had an overactive imagination. Her father joked she'd inherited Grandma's superstition bug. And because someone always had to be at fault for unease, the next argument blamed Mara for starting things again. In that house, the scapegoat wore the same badge as the truth teller. Only her grandmother didn't flinch. The old woman lived in a cottage that smelled of paper and lavender, its shelves packed with yellowed greeting cards, birthday wishes, condolences, love notes whose senders were long dead. Mara read them on rainy afternoons, struck by how much fit inside a folded card, how much more the writers must have wanted to say. "You hear the gremlins?" Grandma said once, not looking up from her tea. "What are gremlins?" "The part of a feeling that doesn't fit inside a word." Grandma turned a card over in her fingers. A long time ago, people said what they meant. Then they learned to be polite instead, and the meanings had nowhere to live. So the meanings made a bargain. They would stay close and translate and wait, as long as people kept greeting each other honestly. "Hello, I see you." That was the deal. That was the whole deal. What happens if people stop? Grandma was quiet for a moment. Then the translators work harder and harder, saying what no one asked them to say, until they wear through. You've heard them. You know how tired they sound. "Why don't I have one?" Mara asked. Grandma tapped her chest. Maybe yours went inside the wiring. Maybe it wanted to understand the noise that comes after words before it picked a side. That night, Mara lay awake listening to the house breathe. Her parents slept in separate rooms, and two weary shapes drifted through the hallway between them like fog unsure of which shore to rest on. She whispered to them, testing a theory. "Can you hear me?" A rustle answered, half syllable, half sigh. It sounded relieved. By the time she was 10, Mara kept notebooks hidden under her bed, filled in 2 columns. What people said, and what she heard underneath. "I'm fine, / I'm breaking. Maybe later, / I'm afraid now. Love you / don't leave." The notebooks looked like translations from a forgotten language. She was beginning to suspect that was exactly what they were. School confused her. Teachers praised empathy as reading the room, but when she did it too well, they called her sensitive. Other kids navigated friendship by instinct, glances, micro smiles, invisible handshakes of belonging. Mara relied on language. She asked questions until people squirmed. "Why are you mad?" "I'm not mad." "She's furious," whispered the invisible echo. "You are," Mara said aloud, and another friend vanished. The more she tried to clarify, the lonelier she became. Her circle of trust shrank to one old woman and the low hum of the unseen. One spring evening, a fight broke out at home. Nothing spectacular, just the usual storm of politeness curdling into accusation. Money, then who had started the arguing, then Mara's attitude. The air above the table filled with shapes, one folded like a heart pressed into a fist, another trailing smoke in the outline of her mother's face. Mara stared until heat rose in her chest and something broke loose. "Stop lying! I can see them! They're screaming at each other right now!" The room froze. Her father's fork clattered. Grandma, visiting for supper, set down her glass and said nothing. "Mara," her father said slowly, "we've talked about pretending. I'm not pretending. They're right there." She pointed, frantic, into the air above the table. Her mother stood and grabbed her shoulders hard enough to sting. "You do not get to decide what other people feel. Do you understand me?" That word, decide, as if love were a policy vote instead of a pulse. Mara tore from the room into the night garden, rain misting her hair. Among the lilacs, she could still hear the shapes quarreling, quieter now, ashamed of being noticed. She crouched under a tree and whispered into the dark, "Then I'll talk to you myself." A small glimmer answered near her hand, a fluttering knot of light with a voice like wind between chords. For the first time she understood. The whispers weren't noise. They were waiting for someone willing to speak back. After that night, she stopped trying to correct her family, let them decide whatever stories made them comfortable. If she couldn't stop hearing the gremlins, she could at least learn their language. She recorded bedtime phrases, goodbyes, apologies, and the murmurs that followed. Patterns emerged. Vowels stretched when affection was genuine, consonants sharpened when fear entered. Emotions have grammar. She didn't call it that yet, but her future had already begun to conjugate. Sometimes Grandma read the journal pages aloud, and together they watched the shapes respond, purring, crackling, fluttering like moths around meaning. "Careful," Grandma warned. "You start listening too deep, you'll want to fix everyone." "I already do," Mara said. The old woman smiled a sad, knowing smile. "Then promise me one thing. When the day comes that you can see them clearly, don't let anger be the first thing you say." Mara promised, because she was still a child, and promises felt like spells. But some spells are warnings dressed as kindness, and this one would echo for decades. Chapter 2. The Translator of Tension. By 13, Mara had learned that most people didn't want to be understood. They wanted to be agreed with. Understanding could change you, and change frightened everyone. At school, she moved through hallways like an interpreter between nations at war with themselves. Every group had its dialect of affection. The athletes used insults, the artists used melancholy, the teachers used metaphors that sounded like threats. Beneath each language, the gremlins hummed low harmonies of craving and self-protection. Mara heard them all and said almost nothing. At home, her parents now lived on opposite sides of the house, conducting diplomacy through chore lists and forwarded bills. Their gremlins, thin and translucent from years of overwork, had given up following them and trailed Mara instead, seeking anyone who still listened. They made a soft static in her room at night. She tried once more to broker peace. "Mom, Dad, maybe if you said what you actually felt?" Her mother sighed. "Not everything has to be about feelings, Mara." Her father added, "You're not responsible for our choices." Behind them, their gremlins, one gray, one faintly red, shook their heads in perfect unison. Mara looked at the two of them, the mirrored exhaustion, the careful distance maintained like a skill, and could not have said which of them she pitied more, or which of them she was more likely to become. By 15, she'd stopped arguing. Her notebooks became field journals, date, time, phrase, corresponding gremlin tone. She experimented with her own speech to see how the unseen would react. When she said, "Thank you," absent-mindedly, the gremlins barely stirred. When she said it while actually feeling gratitude, the air shimmered faintly gold. Language was a tuning fork. You could play honesty like a note if you knew the pitch. Rowan found her intensity charming at first. He said she looked at people like there's radio static behind their eyes, and said it like a compliment, which she took as a good sign. For a few months, she tried to act normal. Movies, study sessions, kisses traded like proof of participation. It was the closest she'd come to belonging, and she worked to protect it. But she couldn't ignore the gremlin crouched on his shoulder, a wiry little thing that had started by October to mutter, "She's too much," in a voice like her own father's. She didn't say anything. She tried being quieter. She stopped filling silences. She put her notebooks away when he came over, laughed a half-beat after his jokes, and asked nothing that couldn't be answered comfortably. It worked, in the way her parents' house worked. In December, he broke up with her over text anyway. At school, he told friends she psychoanalyzed him to death. Mara heard the gremlin under it. I felt seen, and it terrified me. But truth had no defense in a hallway full of laughter. She went home, opened her notebook to log the breakup, and found she couldn't decide which column it belonged in, what was said or what was underneath. She had spent 4 months saying nothing she meant. Both columns were hers now. She closed the notebook without writing anything, and that frightened her more than the breakup did. Grandma still called once a week. "When the world gets too loud," she said, "listen for the space between sentences. That's where sincerity hides." At 17, Mara entered the regional science fair with linguistic markers of emotional dishonesty. She played audio recordings and charted micro-changes in pitch and timing. Judges praised her for measuring empathy through language. No one asked how she knew which moments to mark. They assumed algorithms. She offered polite nods. She'd seen what happened to truth-tellers in modern clothing. Graduation night, gremlins swarmed above the crowd like fireflies, some bright with hope, others dimming in real time. Mara stood apart, watching goodbyes that meant good riddance and smiles stitched together with panic. Grandma found her by the bleachers. "You'll lose your hearing for a while," the old woman said. "It happens to listeners. The world will roar so loudly you'll think the gremlins are gone. They're not. They're waiting for you to learn new words." "What kind of words?" "The ones people don't lie in." That summer, she packed her notebooks and left for university. Her parents sent a message. "We're proud of your decision." Even through the screen, she could hear the whisper underneath. "We're relieved." On the train, she opened a fresh notebook and wrote the first line of a new study. Hypothesis: people do not fall out of love, they fall out of translation. Then, almost as an afterthought, goal: learn the native language of love before it becomes extinct. Somewhere in the carriage, a gremlin laughed lightly, approving. For once, Mara didn't correct it.